Hey everybody, it's Wes with Fundamental Games here, and I'm going to do a quick playthrough video of how to play the mini game that'll be included in the upcoming Kickstarter. And this mini game is called DieMinions. So DieMinions is a game that is using little characters that will actually be in a future game called Die in the Dungeon, and it puts them in their own little mini game where they're almost like they're training and sparring against one another. And so the objective of this game, it's a two-player game, and the objective is to win the most cards out of the Deco Dice, or victory cards as we call them. So how this works is each player will have 6 identical cards. And so those 6 cards are going to represent one of each die type: D4, D6, D8, D10, D12, D20. And I've got some cute names for them: Quad, Cubera, Diante the Great, Spartan, Dwelve, and Twent are their names. And each of these cards represents, like I said, one of the major die values, but they also have a little ability. And so what'll happen is, as we're playing through this game, you'll see how those abilities can fluctuate what would normally be a random result. Now, would be remiss if I didn't talk about the core concept prior to this mini game, and that is the Deco Dice. So the Deco Dice is a deck of 24 cards that have each of the different die types featured in multiple sequences, always at a ratio that is even, so that there's no unfairness in one die versus another. Keeping in mind that the D4 will be represented 6 different times throughout this deck, 1 through 4, whereas something like a D20 would only be represented 1 numeral throughout the deck. So statistically, you're going to draw 1s more often on the D4 than you would on the D20. But that's just how this deck works. So how does this game work? Well, we shuffle up the Deco Dice, and that will be a shared deck amongst players. And then each player would select a card from their hand. And again, it's not random. So let's say this person picks Dwelve. They would put it face down on the table so the other player doesn't know what they selected, and the other player would do the same thing. They can do it at the same time. They could do it after one another. This person is going to go with Quad. All right. And so what will happen is both players will reveal their card, and whichever player had the higher value die, so in this case Dwelve, they will be the one who activates their ability and does their attack first. So the way Dwelve reads is they reduce the opponent's attack result by the D4 value on the card they draw. And so what happens from there is we then draw the top card of the the deck of dice, and whatever value matches up with the same icon is the result. So in this case, Dwelve rolled an 11. But Dwelve also takes 3 off the opponent's roll, so that really sabotages Quad there. But if you take a look at Quad has a special ability that if they roll a 4, they can defeat their opponent. So that's pretty snazzy. So let's reveal. And you can see there, Quad actually did roll a 4. The only way Quad would lose by rolling a 4 is if his opponent, or her opponent, depending on how you interpret gender, had rolled a 12 in this case. They would have had to roll their max value to beat the max value of Quad. So what happens is the player on the right will obtain the 2 cards, and that will go into their victory pool of cards. The dice go to the sides, and they cannot be used until round 2. So we go on to the second turn. Player 1 would pick a die of their choice. So let's say this time they're going to pick Spartan. Now that would be face down, but I'm not going to keep putting them face down since I'm playing against myself here. And maybe this player would play, maybe they're going to play Diante the Great. All right. So what would happen is the player with the highest die value would get to play their card first. And it says here, with Spartan, if you attack first, your opponent gets the result of the next lowest die value instead of their die value. So Diante the Great, instead of rolling a D8, is actually going to be rolling a D6. But Spartan still gets to draw a card and get the D10 value, so they rolled a 2. Tough number for Spartan. I don't foresee this ending well. Diante the Great gets to look at the top 2 cards of the deck, and when they draw, they choose one and put the other one back on top of the deck. So now keep in mind that Diante the Great is actually looking at D6s, so they can take the 6 or they could take the 3. What do they want to take? Well, they need to defeat a 2, so either one of these cards is fine. But what card they leave on top affects the next round of gameplay. So they're going to take the 3, put that back on top. The opponent wouldn't have seen that card, and Diante the Great is victorious, so they acquire both of these victory cards. The dice go to either side. We go to the third turn. Each player puts a card face down. We're going to go with Cubera on this side, and on this side we'll go with, they're going to go with 12 this time. They're feeling confident. All right, so Cubera can choose to re-roll a die after they draw it, whereas 12 has that ability you saw before. So 12 is a bigger number. They go first, and they have a 6, but their opponent's going to get -2. Cubera will draw their top card, and they've got a 3, but knowing that 12 already has a 6 and they're going to lose 2, they couldn't possibly win anyway. They are going to accept that loss, not going to even use Cubera's ability. So the player on the right is really teaching them how DieMinions work. Go on to turn 3. This person really wants to take a win, so they're going to drop Twent out. Player on the right. Yeah. They are feeling like they want to hold the crown, so they would put Twent as well. So we've got 2 Twents here. Now Twent's ability is pretty limiting. It only works if one of them rolls a 20. So not likely to happen very often. There's only a 1 in 24 chance. Well, you re-roll the ones that are ours, so 1 in 20 chance, I guess you could say. This Twent rolled a 19. Oh, how do you choose who goes first? If both players have the same die, it's the player who won the last round of battle. If this was the very first turn, then you would just have to flip a coin or do something random to see who went first. All right, so Twent here rolled a 19. Actually, this should be this Twent because they were the first to go. And this Twent rolled a 5. So the player on the right takes over yet again. Feels a little lopsided this game, but trust me, when my son and I played, some very close games in there. So this player decides to go with Quad this time and Spartan this time. The Spartan says if you attack first, your opponent gets the result of the next lowest die value to a minimum of D4, so that actually doesn't affect Quad at all. Spartan draws the first card. Under the D10, they've rolled an 8. Quad draws their card. They've rolled only a 1. They are the loser. Dun, dun, dun. And the final round is Diante versus Cubera. So the player on the left gets to go first. They get to look at the top 2 cards of the deck, and they get to pick one, looking at the D8 value. So they could take the 8 or the 5, and knowing they're off against Cubera, the 5 could be risky. So they will put the 5 on top of the deck, and they will take the 8. So Cubera can choose to reroll by placing the top card that they drew on the bottom of the deck. But Cubera has no hope of beating an 8, so we will just give that card over, and this player has earned their first victory point. And that ends the first half of the game. We still have 12 cards remaining in the deck of dice, so it's not over yet. So what will happen is players will recollect all of their DieMinions, and they will go through what I call round 2 of the deck of dice. And again, both players will they've got all 6 back at their disposal again. They can only use 1 of each throughout the game. So how are they going to do it? This is where some of the strategy comes in, because you would have seen some of the higher values that have already gone through. You would know if a lot of the 1s or 4s were pulled up on the D4s just by watching the cards. So there is some strategy in there, and also strategy in what dice you play when. So we're going to say the player on the left is going to try a high to low sequence. So they're going to lead right in with a charge. They're worried, they're behind. They want to take the cake. They want to take down this player on the right. The player on the right is going to play a mid strategy. They're just going to go with they're going to start with the mighty Diante the Great. All right, which means Twent goes first and takes the top card. It's a 13. They just stick with that. Diante has no hope of beating a 13, but they get to look at the top 2 cards and decide what they want. Now, by putting the top card here on top of the deck and knowing that their opponent already played their Twent, they could stack the beginning round next turn. They know if they drop Twent next turn, they're going to be going first. So just drop that 16 there and take the loss. Unbeknownst to this player, of course, they don't know that that's what this player had set up. we go to the next round. I've already said that this player planned to take Twent to the next round, unless they wanted the D12. Whoops, they only get to look at this one. D12 is only a 4, no, so it makes sense for them to pull Twent. This player has no idea what's on top of the deck and no idea what their opponent's up to. But I said they were going to go to a top-down strategy, so there we go, top-down. D20 is higher than D12, so Twent goes first, and Twent has a mighty 16 there, so pretty tough number for Dwelv to beat. The only way Dwelv is going to win is if they have a D12 card that has a D4 on it. They rolled a 2, and the opponent gets -2. That is not enough to win. So the player on the right, Twent, wins that little spar. Next round, both players will pick their dude. This player is going to go with Spartan, hoping that they are attacking first. This player is looking at their hands. What do they want to do? They're going to Spartan as well, doing that top down that we talked about. So who gets to go first? The player who won the last round of combat gets to go first. So this Spartan, because they're attacking first, they're actually dropping this Spartan down to a D8. Ouch. So we've got a 10 here, nice number, and a 7 here, but they take the D8 value, still a 7. Either way, Spartan has been defeated by Spartan. And that's the end of another turn. 3 dice left. We're doing the top down on the left. This player is going all random strategies. They're going to go with a D4. That means Diante the Great gets to go first. They get to look at the top 2 cards, choose one, and place the other on top of the deck. Well, that's pretty good against Quad, because Quad usually only wins with a 4. So here we can see a 3 and a 2 for the opponent, and with rolling the D8, I could take the 3 or the 6. So Diante takes the 6, puts that on top. Quad has to draw that, which is a 3. 6 beats 3, so the player on the left is victorious. Diante wins. Diante is a pretty decent card, in my opinion. Top-down strategy on the left. Player on the right says, you know what? I'm just going to smash with my Dwelv. Oy, that's tough. Dwelv gets to lead. Rolls a 4, but is going to subtract 4 off Cubera because they get to subtract the D4. Dwelv is tough, powerful barbarian like Die. Cubera has rolled a 3, but could switch dice, but decides it's not worth it because they're already defeated. So there we go. And the final round of the game, Quad versus Cubera. Cubera gets to go first, and they can choose to re-roll one of the last 2 dice. So they can take this 5 or risk it and take that bottom card. Cubera is going to take the 5, leaving this card, which we don't know if there's a 4 on there. Nope. So Quad has a 2, and that means that Quad has been defeated by Cubera. And there you have it. That is the end of the game. So how do you determine who wins? Well, we can see who won by a fair chunk here. It's not always that close or that far away. But this player, you just add up the cards that you acquired. So 6 cards here, which means this player has 18 cards and really took the game. What would happen if anybody ever tied in a round is each player would take 1 card. And if at the end of the game, both players had 12 cards, then you would have to do a showdown where you would just play one more round or keep playing rounds of combat until the next player wins. And there you have it. That is Deco Dice. How the deck works. You can see how all those dice are found within the deck, and that's how a game of DieMinions works. It's my mini game that's included with the Deco Dice Kickstarter. All right, if you have any questions, feel free to send a comment or give me an email, fundamentalgames@icloud.com. Thank you for watching.